The first thing you notice is the wind. It does not howl or scream. It simply moves around the felt walls of the tent with a low, steady push, the kind of sound that has been there all night. You are lying on a thick bed of layered wool blankets, and the air inside the tent is cold, but still, held in by the dense fabric and the curve of the lattice frame. Your eyes open to grey light seeping through the smoke hole at the top, a pale disk of sky that tells you morning has come without any sharp edges. For a long while, you do not move, listening to the wind as it presses and releases, shaping the silence into something you can almost feel against your skin. The tent smells of old wool, dried earth, and a faint trace of mutton fat from the lamp that burned low during the night and has since gone out. Slowly, you push the blankets aside, the movement sending a small drift of cool air across your chest. You sit up on the bed, your feet finding the felt rug beneath, and you reach for the clothes folded neatly on a wooden chest. A woolen tunic goes on first, its weave rough and warm against your shoulders, then a pair of thick trousers, the knees slightly worn but still sturdy. Over these you pull a long deal, the traditional wrap coat, its cloth the color of dry grass, and you fasten the leather belt at your waist, tugging the fabric until it sits comfortably. Your boots, made of soft leather with a high shaft, slip on easily, and you feel the familiar compression around your calves. The last thing you put on is a fur-trimmed hat, its ear flaps tied up for now, but ready to be lowered if the wind grows too sharp. Each piece of clothing settles onto your body with the quiet weight of daily habit, and you do not rush any of it. You cross the tent to the small flap door, untying the leather cord that holds it closed, and you step outside into the early grey morning. The wind greets you at once, a steady current that is not cold enough to bite, but cool enough to make your skin prickle into full wakefulness. It flows around your face and pushes the loose sleeve of your deal against your arm. You turn to look at the camp, a scattering of round felt gurs, their white covers turned silver in the dim light, their smoke holes rising faintly with the last of the night's fires. A few horses stand off to the east, dark shapes against the pale grass, their manes blowing sideways. One of them shifts its weight and snorts softly, a sound that travels on the wind and reaches you already half torn. No one else is moving yet, or if they are inside their tents doing the same slow things you are doing. You walk across the sandy grass, the ground uneven with tufts of dry vegetation that crunch under your boots. The path is short, not more than 50 paces, to a workspace you have set up near the edge of the camp, sheltered slightly by a half-felt screen that you staked into the ground a few weeks ago. The screen flaps in the wind with a dull, rhythmic thumping that you have long since stopped hearing as separate sounds. It has become part of the texture of this place, much like the whistle through the gaps in the ger or the distant cry of a hawk. Beside the screen, a wooden stool waits, and in front of it, spread on a coarse cloth held down by 4 stones at the corners, your tools and materials arranged. You had laid them out the evening before, wiping them clean and setting them in the order they would be needed. Now they gleam dully in the morning light, ready. You reach the cloth and lower yourself onto the stool, feeling the wood creak slightly under you, and you let your eyes travel over the items. A small draw knife with a curved blade and 2 wooden handles rests next to a flat rasp, its iron teeth clogged here and there with pale dust from yesterday's work. There is a bone scraper, smoothed from years of use, its edge thin and translucent. 2 small knives lie in line, one with a straight point and one with a hooked tip. Beyond them, the raw materials, a slender plank of birchwood, pale and straight, the core of the bow you've been tending for weeks. A strip of ibex horn, grey with darker streaks, curved and hard. A bundle of dried sinew, amber and stiff, tied with a thread, and a small clay pot sealed with a wooden lid, inside which is the glue you will warm later. Everything is as you left it, and yet you inspect each piece anyway, because that is how the work is done. The wind tugs at the edge of the cloth, but the stones hold it down, and you barely notice the movement. You pick up the strip of horn, turning it in your hands, feeling its grain with the pad of your thumb. The horn is cool, and the surface is irregular, with ridges that run lengthwise from the base to the tip. It came from an ibex that lived high in the mountains, far to the west, and you can almost feel the distance in the material, the way it absorbed years of sun and wind before it ever reached your hands. You set it down and lift the birch core, a plank about as long as your arm is from shoulder to fingertip, its edges roughly squared but beginning to show the taper you have been working into it. The wood is dry and light, seasoned in the back of your tent through a full cycle of seasons, so that now it will not twist or crack when the bow is strung. You run your thumb along one edge, feeling a slight roughness where you stopped scraping yesterday, and you note it without judgment, just a quiet observation. Your hands move to the sinew bundle, and you loosen the thread that holds it together. The dried strands are stiff, each one the tendon from the leg of a horse that died of old age, and they remind you of a long morning spent cleaning and stripping them, pulling them into fibers while the wind lifted the dust from your hands and carried it away. You draw out a single strand, holding it up to the light. It is translucent, a pale gold color, and when you flex it, it barely bends, hard as a thin strip of horn. Later, you will pound these strands and comb them into soft, feathery fibers, but for now, you simply return the strand to the bundle and tie it up again, a small act of order. The cook fire near the center of the camp crackles with a fresh load of dried dung, and the smoke rises in a thin column, bending sharply when it hits the wind and scattering into nothing. The smell is earthy, and not unpleasant, drifting past you in occasional waves. You lean forward and take the flat rasp in your right hand, your left hand holding the birch core steady on your knee, and you begin to draw the rasp across the wood in a slow, even stroke. The sound is a soft, gritty whisper, and it blends with the thumping screen and the low rush of the wind until you cannot separate one from the other. You work along the belly of the bow, the side that will face the archer, removing tiny layers of wood dust that fall onto your lap and onto the cloth. You pause after a few strokes, blow the dust away, and sight along the edge, checking the taper. It is coming along, very gradually, the profile deepening toward the tips, but there is no need to rush, no deadline, but the winter that is still months away. The sky continues to brighten, the grey deepening into a soft blue that you can see through a gap in the screen. The horses have moved farther off, their shapes now smaller, and a woman's voice calls out somewhere in the camp, a single word you do not fully catch, answered by another voice that sounds like a child's. These sounds rise and fall, and the wind takes them and folds them into its own current. You set the rasp down and pick up the draw knife, its handles fitting easily into your palms, and you place the blade against the edge of the wood, pulling it toward you with a controlled, steady motion. A curl of wood lifts away, pale and thin as a shaving of cheese, and it spirals down to the ground. You repeat the motion, adjusting your grip slightly, feeling the resistance of the wood grain as it runs true and straight. The knife makes a soft, ripping sound, slower than the rasp, and it leaves a smooth surface behind. You work from one end to the other, taking off no more than a whisper of material with each pass, and your mind settles into the rhythm, thinking of nothing in particular, just the feel of the tool in your hands and the shape emerging beneath your fingers. After a time, you place the draw knife down and lift the bone scraper. This tool is for finer work, for removing the small irregularities left by the knife. You hold it at a slight angle and push it along the wood, and a fine, powdery dust gathers at the edge. You scrape, inspect, scrape again, and the process feels like a conversation without words, a back and forth between your hand and the material that needs no translation. The wind picks up for a moment, rattling the screen harder, and a loose bowl somewhere near the cook fire tumbles and rolls. A brief clatter that subsides quickly. You glance up, seeing no one go after it, and you return your gaze to the wood, your concentration unbroken. The sun has risen enough now to cast a weak shadow across your workspace, the light filtering through the screen in long stripes of pale yellow and grey. You notice for the first time that your fingers are dusted white from the birch, and you brush them off on your trousers, leaving faint marks. You take a small clay cup from beside the cloth, a cup that has been keeping warm near a small separate fire pan full of embers, and you sip the tea. It is weak, made from a brick of compressed leaves, and it tastes of the earth and the smoke, a taste that has become so familiar you no longer think of it as flavor, just as part of the morning. The warmth spreads down your throat and settles in your stomach, and you hold the cup in both hands, letting the heat seep into your palms, feeling the wind cool the back of your hands at the same time. You set the cup down and turn your attention to the sinew again, deciding that now is a good time to begin the first step of preparing it. You take the bundle and place it on a flat stone that you use for pounding, a stone worn concave from use, and you pick up a wooden mallet with a head wrapped in leather. You begin to tap the sinew, not with force but with a gentle repetitive percussion that breaks apart the dried fibers. Tap, 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 the sound a dull thud that does not compete with the wind but walks alongside it. The sinew begins to loosen, the strands separating, and you pause to turn the bundle and tap from another angle. The motion is steady, and your arm moves from the elbow in a simple hinge, requiring no thought. Your eyes drift over the camp again, seeing the smoke from the other gers now thickening as the morning meals are prepared, and you catch the scent of millet boiling, a soft, nutty aroma. The horses have stopped walking and are grazing, heads down, and the grass ripples in long waves, following the wind like water. You pound the sinew until the strands are soft and fluffy, like a tangle of pale hair, and then you put the mallet down and begin to comb them with your fingers, pulling the fibers apart one by one, until they lie in a loose pile on the cloth. The wind teases the edges of the pile, lifting a few light fibers that float upward and vanish, and you cover the rest with a piece of felt, weighting it with a stone. Your hands are dusty with sinew particles now, and you take a moment to clean them by rubbing them together and then wiping them on a rag. The rag is old, stained with glue and wood sap, and it smells faintly of fish, but it serves its purpose. You dip your hands in a small bowl of water, rinsing them, and you dry them on the inside of your deal, the fabric absorbing the moisture. With your hands clean, you return to the birch core, picking up the rasp again to smooth a section near the handle where the wood needs to be slightly thicker. You measure the thickness with your thumb and forefinger, feeling the difference, and then you rasp, test, rasp again, the cycle that continues for long, quiet minutes. The wind shifts direction, now coming from the north, and it brings a slightly cooler thread of air that makes you pull the flaps of your hat down over your ears. The sound of the wind changes too, becoming a lower hum as it flows around the back of the screen rather than hitting it directly. You notice these changes without really noticing them as part of the background that you are a part of, and you continue to work. The shadow of the screen has moved noticeably by the time you set the rasp down and decide that the core is ready for the next stage, which will involve the horn and the glue, but that is for later. For now, you simply sit on the stool, the birch core resting across your knees, and you breathe the cold air, feeling it go deep into your lungs and come out again in a small cloud of vapor. The day is still young, and there is no need to do anything else. You watch a bird, a small lark perhaps, ride the wind with its wings outstretched, letting the current carry it sideways without a single flap, and then it drops down into the grass and disappears. Everything is as it should be. You pick up one of the small knives, the one with the hooked tip, and you reach for a new piece of sinew that you have not yet pounded, a thick strand that you will use for wrapping the bow tips later. You begin to trim the end, slicing off a frayed portion with a quick, precise cut, and then you examine the strand, turning it this way and that. The knife is sharp, and the cut is clean. You set it aside and take another strand, trimming it similarly, and the action repeats with the patience of a chant. The wind continues its steady work around you, the screen thumps softly, and the camp sounds ebb and flow. You are aware of the weight of your own body on the stool, the way your spine holds you upright without stiffness, the way your shoulders are loose and your breathing slow. The morning has stretched into mid-morning, and the day ahead is a long, slow river with no rapids. You think for a moment of the bow you are making, and the thought is not a worded thought, but a feeling of the finished thing, the curve of it in your hands, the tension of the sinew backing, the smoothness of the horn belly. That image floats in your mind and then dissolves, leaving you with the present, the trimmed sinew in your hand, the stool under you, the wind around you. You place the trimmed strands in a neat row on the cloth, aligning them by length, and you count them silently. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Enough for now. You tie them together with a thread and put them under a stone to keep them from blowing away. The wind will not let up, but that is its nature. You do not fight it or wish it otherwise. You simply work with it, letting its constant motion become the backdrop for your own slower, smaller motions. The sun climbs higher and the shadows shorten, and you notice the horse-dung fire in the center of the camp has burned down to a bed of coals, the smoke now a mere shimmer of heat. Someone, an older woman, walks past carrying a pair of wooden buckets, and she raises a hand to you in a gesture that is so slight it is almost not there, and you raise your hand in return, a small mirror of recognition, and then she is gone behind a chair. The moment passes without any disturbance in the rhythm, and you turn back to the sinew, thinking that you might begin the combing again, but instead, you simply sit still for a while, listening, being. At last, you pick up a single fiber of sinew that you have already pounded and combed, a fine, soft, hair-like thread, and you hold it between your thumb and forefinger, feeling its subtle resilience. You take the bone scraper and gently burnish it, a motion that does little beyond smoothing the surface, but it is a calming, unnecessary thing, the kind of work that fills the gaps. The wind presses against the screen with a gentle insistence, and the cloth on the ground ripples at the edges. You settle more deeply into the stool, and you begin to trim the sinew, snipping off the very tip of the fiber, then the next, a repetitive, meditative motion that asks for nothing but your quiet presence. The sky outside is fully bright now, and the camp stirs softly, and you continue, one fiber after another, into the long, slow morning. As your hands move among the materials on the cloth, sorting and aligning, your mind drifts backward without effort, the way a feather settles on still water, and you remember the birchwood, how you came by it in a season of thin rivers and pale green leaves. It was not a journey of hardship, but one of long, patient walking, with 2 pack horses that plodded behind you, their hooves making soft thuds on the sandy trail that wound east toward a sheltered river valley. The wind on that day was a light breeze, carrying the scent of wild onions and distant rain, and you walked from sunrise until the sun stood directly overhead, the grass rippling on either side in endless, gentle waves. The river valley, when you reached it, was a fold in the steppe, a place where the land dipped and the water ran clear over smooth stones, and there the birch trees grew in a dense grove, their white trunks catching the light, their leaves making a sound like 1,000 small whispers. You did not cut the first tree you saw. Instead, you walked among them, touching the bark, pressing your palm against the trunks to feel for straightness, for a grain that ran true, because a bow core must come from a tree that has grown slowly and without twisting. You found a tree of medium girth, its bark peeling in fine, papery layers, and you knelt beside it, taking out a small saw with a bone handle, and you began to cut through the base, the saw making a low, rhythmic rasp that the river nearly drowned out. The tree came down with a soft crackle, and you spent the rest of that afternoon trimming the branches with a hatchet, stripping the bark in long ribbons that you rolled and set aside for future use, and then you cut the trunk into manageable lengths, each one a potential bow, though only the finest would survive the long seasoning. The pack horses stood nearby, cropping grass, and the sun moved across the sky while you worked, your hands growing sticky with sap that smelled sweet and sharp. You loaded the wood onto one of the horses, tying it carefully with leather straps so it would not shift, and you began the walk back to camp, the light turning gold and the shadows lengthening behind you, your mind full of nothing but the good fatigue of a simple task completed. That memory fades like smoke, and your hands are in the present again, lifting the strip of ibex horn from the cloth, turning it under the grey light while the wind rattles the screen with a steady, muffled thumping. The horn is cool and heavy for its size, and as you run your thumb along its curve, you recall the hunter from the mountains, the one who traded it to you, a quiet man with a face like weathered leather who came to your camp late in the autumn, when the sky was the color of slate and the wind already carried the first bite of winter. He had come from the high passes in the west, where the ibex climb sheer rock faces and the air is thin and cold, and he brought with him a bundle of horns wrapped in old felt, their tips worn smooth from years of clashing and grazing. You sat with him inside your ger, sharing tea and dried curd, and the fire crackled between you, the smoke rising through the hole overhead while the wind howled outside, but inside it was still and warm. He spread the horns out on the floor, and you inspected each one, feeling the weight, sighting along the curve, looking for the dense, fine-grained horn that would absorb compression without cracking. You chose two that matched well, one for each limb of the bow, and you traded him a new knife with a horn handle and a pouch of salt for them, the exchange happening in silence after a few murmured words, because words were not needed. After he left, walking back into the wind with his cloak pulled tight, you sat alone and began the first rough trimming of the horn, using a heavy rasp to remove the outermost layer of weathered material, the dust falling into a bowl at your feet, and you worked until the lamp burned low and your shoulders ached from the steady motion, the sound of the rasp blending with the wind until you could not tell them apart. The wind outside the screen shifts now, pushing a strand of hair across your forehead, and you tuck it back without thought, your fingers then reaching for the small clay pot that holds the dried fish bladders and hide scraps that will become glue, the pot sealed with a wooden lid that fits snugly and smells faintly of brine. The memory of making glue rises as you lift the lid and peer inside at the amber crystals, seeing how they catch the weak light, and you remember a stretch of warm days by a lake, the water flat and grey under a clouded sky, when you took the bladders of fish caught earlier that season and scraped them clean. The fish had come from a slow, cold river, their flesh eaten and their bones dried for other uses, and you had saved the bladders in a leather pouch, keeping them moist with lake water until you could process them. You built a small fire on the shore, using driftwood and dried reeds, and you placed the bladders in a bronze pot of water, boiling them slowly, the bubbles rising in a soft, continuous murmur that mixed with the lapping of the lake against the pebbled shore. The smell was not foul, but earthy and marine, a low, organic scent that clung to your clothes for days afterward, and you stirred the pot with a willow stick, watching the bladders soften and break apart into a cloudy, viscous liquid. You added scraps of hide from a goat that had been butchered the previous month, the trimmings you had saved and dried, and you let them simmer too, the collagen leaching out and thickening the brew until it coated the stick with a shiny film. All that day and into the evening you tended the fire, adding water when it grew too low, skimming impurities with a flat piece of horn, and when at last the liquid had reduced to a thick, clear amber, you poured it onto a greased board to cool, where it set into a gelatin that you sliced into strips and dried in the sun over many days, the strips curling and hardening into the crystals now stored in the pot. The memory of that patient boiling, the heat on your face, the cry of gulls overhead, and the soft splashing of the lake returns to you with a gentle clarity, and then it recedes as you replace the lid and set the pot back on the cloth. You pick up a single strand of sinew, one of the tough dried lengths that you will later pound and comb, and you hold it in your palm, its translucence showing fine striations like the grain of old ice, and you remember your teacher, the older Bowyer who taught you this craft when you were little more than a child. His name was Chulan, and his hands were brown and creased, the knuckles knotted from years of drawing bows and shaping horn, and he moved with a slowness that was not weakness, but a deep, settled patience, the kind that comes from knowing exactly how long every task takes. You remember sitting with him by the evening fire, the same fire that crackled with dried dung and cast long shadows against the ger wall, and you watched him strip sinew from the leg tendons of a horse that had died of old age, a calm-bred mare who had been led far from the camp and put down without pain. The tendons were thick and white, glistening in the firelight, and Chulan held one in his left hand while his right hand worked a small, sharp knife, slicing away the sheath of connective tissue with a motion as smooth as water flowing over a smooth stone. He did not speak as he worked, and neither did you. The fire popped and the wind sang outside, and his hands continued their unhurried dance, peeling, slicing, pulling the long fibers free, and laying them on a piece of felt to dry. You watched his face, half-lit and calm, his eyes focused but without strain, and you tried to imitate his movements later when he handed you the knife, your own hands clumsy at first, the tendons slipping, the fibers tearing unevenly. But he corrected you with a soft grunt and a gesture, showing you the angle of the blade, the right pressure, until you found the rhythm yourself. The sinew you hold now might well come from that very horse or from another like her, but the feeling in your fingers when you touch it carries the memory of those evenings, the fire's warmth, the old man's quiet presence, the way the craft passed from his hands to yours without fanfare, as naturally as the wind passes from the steppe to the hills. You lay the sinew strand back on the cloth and let your hands rest on your knees for a moment, the present reasserting itself with the sound of the wind pressing against the screen, the rattle of a loose bowl somewhere beyond the felt partition, the distant call of a bird that rides the currents high above. Your eyes travel over the arranged materials, the birch core now shaped and ready, the ibex horn waiting to be boiled and flattened, the sinew still needing to be pounded and combed into soft fibers, the glue pot sealed and quiet. Each piece carries a story, a journey of steps taken across the steppe, of hours spent in patient labor, and yet here they lie together on a simple cloth, held down by stones, and you are the point where all those journeys meet. The wind lifts the edge of the cloth slightly, but the stones hold firm, and you smooth the fabric flat with a single absent gesture. The day has not progressed far. The shadows still stretch long toward the east, and the air is still cool enough to keep your movements measured. You think of the river valley where the birch grew, the grove of white trunks and whispering leaves, and you almost smell the sap again. Sweet and sharp, but the present smells of dust and dry felt, and the faint, nutty aroma of millet boiling from a cook fire down the line of gers. You think of the hunter walking into the wind with his bundle of horns, the salt you traded him, the way his eyes crinkled in quiet acknowledgement, and you almost hear the crunch of his boots on the frost-stiffened grass. You think of the lake shore, the bubbles rising in the glue pot, the cry of gulls, the sun on your neck, and you almost feel the pebbles under your feet as you collected firewood. You think of Chulan's hands, moving like slow water, the firelight on his face, the weight of the knife he placed in your palm, and you almost sense his presence beside you now, a ghost of patience. But these are only thoughts, gentle and without urgency, and they pass through your mind like the wind through the gaps in the screen, leaving no trace but a quiet contentment. Your hands move again, picking up the ibex horn strip, and you compare it to the birch core, holding them side by side, eyeing the lengths, noting where the horn will need to be trimmed to match the taper you have already shaped. The horn is slightly longer than necessary, and the curve is opposite to the bow's eventual reflex, so you will have to heat it and flatten it, a process for another day. For now, you simply lay them together, feeling the weight of each, aligning them in your mind, and then you set them down. The loose bowl rattles again, a quick, hollow clatter, and a child's voice rises somewhere in the camp, a high, clear note that is cut off by the wind before it can fully form. You look up briefly, seeing the smoke from the gears trailing sideways, the grass bending in long, sweeping strokes, the horses now lying down in a hollow where the wind is less, their legs tucked beneath them. The sky is a pale, washed-out blue, the kind of sky that holds no threat of storm, only the steady flow of air from the west. You take the sinew bundle and begin to untie it again, your fingers working the thread loose, and you spread the strands on the cloth, counting them, grouping them by thickness. The ones from the leg tendons are long and even, while some shorter pieces come from the backstrap, and you separate them into two piles, knowing that the longer strands will form the main backing layer and the shorter ones can be used for wrapping. This sorting is a quiet, repetitive task, and your mind drifts once more, but this time it does not travel far. It simply rests in the feel of the sinew, the slight graininess of the dried fibers, the way they click faintly when you tap them together. The wind continues its constant push, the screen thumping, and you sit in the center of it all, the locus of small movements, a buyer assembling not just a weapon, but a collection of seasons, of walks and trades and slow fires, all converging on this one morning. The memories have settled now, leaving you with the simple presence of the materials, and you are ready for the next step, the shaping and the glue, but you do not rush toward it. You simply sit and sort and breathe, and the wind wraps around you like a familiar blanket. The birch core rests across your knees, pale and straight, and you lift it with both hands, feeling its lightness, the way it almost floats above your palms. You've been working this plank for many days already, roughing out the shape from the split log you brought back from the river valley. But now the work enters a finer stage, a stage that requires less force and more attention. The kind of attention that comes from the tips of your fingers as much as from your eyes. You set the wood on the cloth and pick up the draw knife, its curved blade gleaming dully in the grey light, its two wooden handles worn smooth by the grip of hands that came before yours, and you position the plank so that one end rests on the ground, the other angled up toward you, braced lightly against your knee. The wind presses against the screen with its low, steady push, and you lean into the first stroke, pulling the blade toward you along the edge of the wood, a curl of birch lifting away with a soft, ripping whisper, pale and thin as a shaving of beeswax. The curl falls to the cloth, and you pause to sight along the edge, closing one eye, checking the line that runs from the center to the tip. The wood is still thick at this stage, closer to a squared beam than a bow limb, but you can see the taper you have already begun, a subtle narrowing that will become more pronounced over the hours ahead. You shift your grip on the draw knife, your palms finding the handles with the ease of long habit, and you take another stroke, this one slightly angled to remove a deeper shaving from the belly side. The grain of the birch is tight and even, running in faint, wavy lines that the knife follows without resistance, and the sound it makes is a steady, rhythmic shush that blends with the thumping screen and the low whistle of the wind. You work from the center toward the tip, then turn the plank and work the other direction, your hands moving in a slow, controlled dance that never varies, that asks for nothing but your quiet presence. The morning has turned the sky a lighter shade of grey, and the light that falls on your workspace is soft and diffuse, casting no strong shadows, making it easy to see the subtle contours of the wood. You pause every few strokes to run your thumb along the surface, feeling for bumps or hollows, closing your eyes briefly to let your touch read what your eyes might miss. The birch is cool and smooth under the blade, but beneath the smoothness there are tiny ripples of grain that you can feel as faint vibrations through the handles, like the hum of a distant string. You scrape, test, turn the wood, scrape again, and the repetition settles into your bones, a slow rhythm that has no need for thought. Your mind is not empty, but it is filled with nothing in particular, just the sensation of the knife, the sound of the wind, the faint, sweet smell of birch dust that rises from each cut. The pile of shavings at your feet grows slowly, pale curls that interlock like the rings of a nest, and occasionally the wind reaches under the screen and scatters a few of them, sending them tumbling across the sandy grass. You do not watch them go. Your eyes stay on the wood, on the changing shape that emerges stroke by stroke, the flat plank slowly transforming into something with a gentle, even taper, the handle area left slightly thicker, the tips narrowing to a width you measure with your thumb and forefinger. You have no ruler, no mark stick, only the span of your own hand, a measurement that has become so familiar it is part of your body. The tip should be as wide as your thumb is at the first joint, the handle as wide as 3 fingers held together, and you check these dimensions often, not with anxiety, but with a calm, methodical care, the way a shepherd counts sheep without needing to speak the numbers. The draw knife needs a brief sharpening, and you set it down on the cloth, reaching for a small whetstone that sits in a leather pouch at the edge of your workspace. The stone is dark grey, slick with oil, and you spit on it once, then draw the blade across it in slow circular motions, the metal singing a high, thin note that cuts through the wind for a moment. You turn the knife and sharpen the other side, matching the bevels, feeling the edge with the pad of your thumb until it bites slightly, and then you wipe the blade clean with the rag that hangs from your belt. The whole process takes only a few minutes, but it is a ritual you never skip, because a dull tool makes rough work, and rough work is not the way of a bowyer. You pick up the knife and resume your scraping, the blade now gliding with an even, smoother sound, the shavings coming away finer and more translucent, almost like paper. As you work, you become aware of the camp waking more fully around you. A dog barks somewhere to the north, a single, low woof that does not repeat, and the sound of a wooden bucket clanking against a stone carries on the wind before fading. Someone is chopping wood with a dull thunk that falls into the rhythm of the morning, a counterpoint to the higher, softer sound of your draw knife. The horses have risen from their hollow and are moving slowly across the grass, their shapes dark and patient, their heads low as they graze. You glance up once, your hands pausing, and you see a hawk riding the wind high above, its wings outstretched and motionless, letting the current carry it in slow circles. The image lingers for a moment, and then you return your gaze to the birch, your hands resuming their work as if they had never stopped. The taper on the belly side is coming along, but now you must also work on the back, the side that will eventually receive the sinew backing. You turn the plank over, examining the surface, and you note a slight ridge near the center, a remnant of the rough shaping you did days ago. You take up the flat rasp, its iron teeth clogged with pale dust from yesterday, and you begin to draw it across the ridge, the sound a soft, gritty scrape that is lower in pitch than the draw knife. The rasp removes material more slowly, more gradually, and you work with short, even strokes, checking the surface often with your fingers, feeling the ridge diminish under your touch until the back of the bow is as smooth and even as the belly. You blow the dust away, the fine particles hanging in the air for a moment before the wind carries them off, and then you sight along the entire length, turning the wood in the light, making sure there are no twists or warps. The birch is true as you knew it would be, and a quiet satisfaction settles in your chest, not a feeling of pride, but of rightness. The sense that the material is cooperating, that the work is progressing as it should. You set the rasp down and take up the bone scraper, a tool shaped from the rib of a large animal, its edge thin and smooth and slightly flexible. This tool does not cut so much as burnish, removing the finest layer of wood dust, leaving a surface that feels almost polished. You hold it at a shallow angle and push it along the belly of the bow, and the dust that gathers at the edge is so fine it feels like flour between your fingers. The scraper makes a soft, hissing sound, barely audible over the wind, and you work in long, slow strokes from the handle to the tip, overlapping each stroke by half a finger's width, covering every inch of the surface. The wood begins to glow, not with any applied finish, but with the natural luster that comes from being scraped smooth, the grain revealing itself in subtle, rippling patterns that catch the light. You pause to run your palm along the belly, feeling the satiny texture, and you nod slightly to yourself, a small private acknowledgement. The handle area needs more attention, because this is where your hand will grip the bow, where the pressure will be greatest, and it must be shaped not only for strength but for comfort. You pick up the small knife with the straight point and begin to carve the handle, rounding the square edges, creating a gentle swell that will fit the curve of your palm. The knife makes a different sound from the other tools, a soft, crisp peeling as it removes tiny chips of birch, and you turn the wood frequently, checking the shape from all angles, fitting your hand around the grip to test the feel. The handle should not be too thick, or your fingers will not close around it properly, not too thin, or the bow will be weak at the center. You find the balance through a series of small adjustments, each one barely perceptible, and the shape emerges slowly, a subtle waist in the middle of the plank that will one day be wrapped with leather for a secure hold. The wind picks up as you work, rattling the screen harder, but you do not hurry, your hands remain steady, the knife moving with the same deliberate care, the chips falling onto the cloth in a small pile of pale fragments. Your shoulders begin to feel a slight ache from the prolonged work, the kind of ache that is not painful but simply present, a reminder of the hours you have spent leaning forward. You straighten up on the stool, rolling your shoulders once, twice, and you reach for the clay cup of tea that still sits near the small fire pan. The tea has cooled now, but you drink it anyway, the liquid tepid and slightly bitter, washing the dust from your throat. You hold the cup in both hands for a moment, looking out across the camp, your eyes resting on the distant line of grass that meets the sky, a boundary that is not sharp but soft, a blur of beige and pale blue. The wind has chased most of the clouds away, and the sun is a hazy disk behind a thin veil of high atmosphere, casting a light that is almost white. Everything is quiet. or as quiet as it ever gets here, the sounds of the camp blending into a single, low hum that the wind carries and disperses. You finish the tea and set the cup down, then return your attention to the birch core. The next stage is to check the flex of the wood, to see how it bends under pressure, and to begin the long process of tillering, that the true tillering will come later after the horn and sinew are applied. For now, you simply want to ensure that the core is responsive, that it will bend evenly without hinging in one spot. You stand up from the stool, your knees stiff from sitting, and you walk a few paces to a wooden block that you have set in the ground, a thick plank with a notch cut into the top. You place one tip of the birch core into the notch, and then you hold the handle with both hands, pressing down gently, watching the curve of the wood as it bends. The bend is smooth and even, a graceful arc that begins near the handle and flows out to the tips without any sharp angles, and you hold it there for a moment, feeling the resistance, the way the wood pushes back against your hands with a springy, alive sensation. You ease off the pressure and let the wood return to its straight shape, and then you bend it again, testing from the other side, checking for symmetry. The birch responds well, its grain holding true, and you make a mental note to thin the tips just slightly more in the coming days, a tiny adjustment that will improve the overall flex. You return to the stool and pick up the draw knife once more, working on the tips as you just planned, taking the finest possible shavings from the last hand span of each limb. The tips must be narrow enough to accept the horn nocks that will later be glued on, and you shape them with care, the knife moving in short, delicate strokes, the wood curling away in wisps that drift down like feathers. The sound is a soft, intermittent whisper, and you pause often to measure the width with your thumb, to check the taper with your eye, to run your finger along the edge and feel for any roughness. The wind is shifted again, now coming from the south, and it brings a slightly warmer thread of air, a hint of the afternoon to come, and you loosen the ear flaps of your hat, but do not tie them up yet. The screen continues its steady thumping, the loose bowl rattles once more, and a child laughs somewhere in the camp, a bright, bubbling sound that is quickly swallowed by the wind, leaving only the memory of it. You have been working for many hours now, though you do not keep track of time in any formal way, measuring the day only by the movement of the light and the feeling in your body. The birch core has transformed from a rough plank into a shaped limb, its taper smooth and even, its handle shaped to fit the hand, its tips narrowed and ready for the next stage. You hold it up in front of you, sighting along its length one final time, and you see a bow waiting inside the wood. Not yet finished, but already present, already implied by the shape you have given it. You set it down on the cloth with a sense of quiet completion, not the end of the work, but the end of this phase, a natural resting place. You take up the rag and wipe the wood dust from your hands, then from the blade of the draw knife, then from the rasp and the scraper, cleaning each tool before you set it back in its place on the cloth. The rag is stiff with dried glue and old sap, but it serves, and you fold it and tuck it back into your belt. The pile of shavings at your feet has grown large, and you scoop it up with both hands, carrying it over to the cook fire where you drop it onto the coals. The birch coals catch at once, flaring with a brief pale flame that smells sweet and clean, and then they are gone, leaving only a puff of smoke that the wind snatches away. You stand by the fire for a moment, warming your hands, feeling the heat seep into your knuckles, and you watch the coals glow and pulse, the ash building on their edges in soft grey flakes. The fire is a small, constant thing, much like the work you do, and it asks for nothing but to be fed occasionally and left to burn. The afternoon is approaching, the light beginning to take on the faintest golden tinge, and you walk back to your workspace, settling onto the stool once more. The birch core lies on the cloth, pale and ready, and you lay your hand on it for a moment, feeling the smoothness you have created, the shape that has emerged from your patient labor. The wind has eased slightly, the screen now flapping with a softer, more intermittent rhythm, and the camp has quieted again. The morning chores done, the afternoon rest beginning. You sit and breathe, and the world breathes with you, and the world breathes with you, and the bow waits. You set the birch core aside on the cloth, laying it gently so that the shaped belly faces upward, and you cover it with a piece of felt to keep the dust from settling on the smooth surface you have worked so long to create. Then you turn your full attention to the horn, the two strips of ibex horn that lie dark and curved on the cloth, their grey streaks catching the pale light, their surfaces still rough from the initial trimming you did weeks ago. The horn is cool to the touch, and you lift one strip, feeling its weight, its density, the way it seems to hold a memory of the high, cold mountains where the ibex once climbed. You run your thumb along the curve, noting the ridges and valleys, the places where the horn grew in layers, and you begin to plan in your mind the steps you will take to transform this hard, twisted material into a flat, smooth belly for the bow. The wind outside the screen has steadied into a gentle, constant flow, and the loose bowl has finally been picked up by someone, its clatter now absent, leaving only the soft thump of the felt screen and the distant murmur of the camp. The first thing the horn needs is heat, because horn in its natural state is hard and brittle, unwilling to bend or flatten, but when it is warmed in near boiling water it becomes soft and pliable, like thick leather, and it can be shaped without cracking. You stand up from the stool, your knees creaking slightly, and you walk over to the small firepan that sits just inside the shelter of the screen, a shallow iron bowl filled with embers that still glow a soft, pulsing orange beneath a layer of grey ash. Beside the firepan sits a bronze pot, small and wide, its bottom blackened from many uses, and you fill it with water from a leather bag that hangs on a wooden peg, the water cold and clear, smelling faintly of the stream where you collected it early in the morning before the camp fully woke. You set the pot onto the firepan, nudging the embers closer with a stick, and then you wait, standing with your hands loosely at your sides, watching the surface of the water for the first signs of movement. Waiting for water to boil is a slow, quiet thing, and you do not watch the pot with any impatience, but simply stand near it, feeling the warmth of the embers on your shins, listening to the wind as it moves around the screen and through the grass beyond. The water begins to show tiny bubbles along the inner wall of the pot, small silver beads that cling to the bronze and then release, rising slowly to the surface and vanishing. More bubbles come, and then a gentle steam begins to curl upward, a wisp of vapor that the wind catches and bends sideways, carrying it away across the camp. The sound of the heating water is a low, murmuring hiss, barely audible, and you lean down once to check the embers, adding a few dried dung chips from a pile nearby, the chips breaking apart in your hand and falling into the firepan, where they catch with a soft orange glow and a faint earthy smell. When the water is boiling gently, the surface rolling with small continuous bubbles, you take the first strip of horn and lower it into the pot, using a pair of wooden tongs to push it fully under the water. The horn sinks slowly, and the boiling pauses for a moment, then resumes, the bubbles clustering around the horn, the steam thickening slightly. You stand back and wait again, because the horn must soak in the heat for many minutes, long enough for the warmth to penetrate all the way through the dense material, softening the keratin fibers until they are willing to move. You do not count the minutes in your head, you simply let them pass, your eyes drifting over the camp, your hands finding the rag at your belt and wiping away a smudge of birch dust that still clings to your knuckles. The camp has settled into its midday quiet, the morning chores finished, the afternoon rest not yet begun. A woman sits outside a jar in the distance, her hands working a spindle, the weight turning and turning, the wool twisting into yarn with a motion so steady it looks like a single, continuous gesture. The horses have moved farther off, their shapes small now against the pale grass, and the hawk has disappeared from the sky, leaving only the wide, empty blue. The smell of the boiling horn reaches your nose, faint and slightly animal, like singed hair but softer, not unpleasant, just a reminder of the material's origin. You breathe it in and let it go, your mind quiet, your body still. After a time, you test the horn by lifting it partly out of the water with the tongs, pressing the surface with your thumb. It gives slightly, no longer rock hard but yielding, like dense rubber, and you nod to yourself and lift it fully out, the water streaming off it in small hot rivulets that steam in the cool air. You carry the horn back to your stool, holding it with the tongs because it is too hot to touch, and you lay it on a flat stone that you have placed on the cloth for this purpose. The horn steams on the stone, the grey surface turning darker where the heat has penetrated, and you waste no time in picking up the coarse rasp, because the horn will cool quickly and must be worked while it is still pliable. The rasp bites into the horn with a sound that is different from the sound it made on the wood, a harsher, more brittle scrape, and the dust that falls is pale grey, finer than wood dust, almost like sand. You work along the inner curve of the horn, the side that will be glued to the birch core, and you remove layer after thin layer, flattening the natural concavity, bringing the surface down to a level that will match the belly of the bow. The horn is hot under your hands, the heat seeping through the rasp handles, and the steam rises from the stone, curling around your wrists. You work in long, steady strokes, turning the horn frequently, checking the flatness with your thumb, and the rhythm of the rasping is a slow, grinding pulse that blends with the wind, a sound that is almost like the distant grinding of stones in a stream. The horn begins to cool, and you feel it stiffening under the rasp, the bite becoming harder, the dust changing from fine to slightly coarser. You stop and return the horn to the pot, submerging it again, letting it reheat while you rest your hands. Your fingers are dusted with grey, and you wipe them on the rag, the motion automatic, and then you take a sip of water from a leather bottle, the water still cool, tasting of the stream and of the leather. A clean, earthy taste. The fire pan crackles softly, the dung chip settling, and you nudge another chip onto the embers, watching it catch and glow. The wind has shifted again, blowing now from the east, and it carries a faint, distant smell of dry grass, and something floral, maybe wild thyme crushed under the hooves of the horses. The screen flaps and settles, and you sit in the pause, breathing slowly, letting the moment be what it is. When the horn is hot again, you lift it out and return to the stone, picking up the rasp, resuming the slow grinding strokes. This cycle repeats many times over the course of the afternoon. Heat, rasp, cool, reheat, rasp again. Each cycle brings the horn closer to flat, the inner surface becoming smooth and even, the curve gradually straightening under the heat and pressure. You do not rush the cycles, you let each one take the time it needs, and the time between cycles is filled with small quiet actions, wiping the rasp clean, adjusting the position of the stone, adding water to the pot when the level drops too low, watching the steam rise and scatter. The work is monotonous in the best way, a gentle, repetitive sequence that asks nothing of your mind except to stay present with the material, to notice when the horn is hot enough and when it has cooled too much, to feel the flatness with your thumb and know when it is right. The second strip of horn waits on the cloth, and eventually you turn your attention to it, repeating the same process, heating and rasping, until both strips are flat on one side, their surfaces matching the width and curve of the birch core that lies under the felt. You hold them up side by side, comparing them, and they are nearly identical now, the grey streaks running in parallel lines, the edges straight and true. The horn has a certain beauty to it, a dark, translucent quality that the light catches, and when you hold a strip up to the sky, you can see the layers of growth, faint concentric rings that tell the story of the ibex's life. The summers of plenty and the winters of scarcity, the years written in keratin. You lower the horn and set it on the cloth next to the birch, and the two materials lie there together, wood and horn, pale and dark, waiting to be joined. Your hands are tired now, the muscles in your forearms feeling a dull, warm ache from the hours of rasping, and you flex your fingers, opening and closing them slowly, feeling the blood move. You stand up from the stool and stretch your arms overhead, your spine lengthening, your shoulders pulling back, and you walk a few paces away from the workspace, out past the screen into the open air. The wind greets you fully here, unimpeded by felt, and it flows around your body, cool and steady, lifting the edge of your hat and tugging at your sleeves. You stand and look out at the steppe, at the endless grass that bends and straightens in waves, at the distant line of low hills that are blue with distance, at the sky that arches over everything, pale and infinite. The world is large and quiet, and you are a small part of it, a bowyer standing by a felt screen, resting his hands. The thought is not lonely, but peaceful, a sense of belonging to something vast and unhurried. After a while, you walk back to the workspace and sit down again, the stool creaking under you, and you pick up the horn strips one more time, running your thumb along the flat surfaces you have created. They are not perfectly smooth yet. They still need to be refined with the finer rasp and then the bone scraper, but the main work is done, the heavy shaping accomplished. You take the finer rasp, its teeth smaller and closer together, and you begin to work on the first strip. The sound now a softer, higher scratch, the dust finer, the strokes shorter. You work along the length, then across it, creating a surface that is level in all directions, and you pause often to hold the strip up and sight along its edge, making sure there is no twist, no warp, no unevenness that will affect the bow's performance later. The horn is cool now, fully cooled, and it works differently than it did when hot, more resistant, requiring more patience, but you have plenty of patience and you give it freely. The afternoon light has begun to deepen, the sun sinking toward the distant hills, and the shadows under the screen are longer now, stretching across the cloth in slanting bars of grey and gold. You light the small iron lamp that hangs from a pole near your workspace, the wick catching with a soft yellow flame that steadies after a moment, adding its faint, warm glow to the fading daylight. The lamp smells of mutton fat, a rich, savoury scent that mingles with the horn dust and the smoke from the fire pan, and the whole workspace takes on a cosy, enclosed feeling, a little circle of light in the vastness of the steppe. You continue to rasp, the motion steady, the sound a soft, consistent murmur, and the horn becomes smoother and smoother under your hands. The flat surface now almost polished, the grey streaks glowing faintly in the lamplight. When both strips are fully flat and smooth on the inner side, you set the rasp down and pick up the bone scraper, the same tool you used on the birch, and you begin to burnish the horn, the scraper making a soft, hissing sound. The horn dust so fine now that it floats in the air like smoke. You work slowly, deliberately, covering every inch of the surface, and the horn begins to take on a slight sheen, a soft luster that catches the light and holds it. The feel of the burnished horn under your thumb is like smooth stone, cool and hard and flawless, and you know that when this surface is glued to the birch core, the bond will be strong and even, with no gaps or weak points. You set the finished strips aside on the cloth, side by side, and you cover them with a piece of felt to protect them from dust and from the wind, which has not let up all day, which continues its steady, patient work of shaping the world outside. You clean your tools one by one, wiping the horn dust from the rasped teeth with the rag, oiling the blade of the bone scraper with a drop of mutton fat from a small clay pot, and then you set each tool in its proper place on the cloth, aligning them as you did in the morning, the draw knife, the rasps, the scrapers, the small knives. The workspace is tidy, everything in order, and you feel a quiet sense of completion, not the completion of the bow, but the completion of another stage, another day of slow, careful labour. The wind has not stopped, the screen still flaps, the lamp still burns, and you sit on the stool for a long moment, your hands resting on your thighs, your eyes half closed, listening to the sounds of the evening settling over the camp. A dog barking once, a horse whinnying far off, a cook fire popping, a child singing a tuneless song that rises and falls and is swallowed by the wind. The horn is ready, and tomorrow you will begin the sinew, but for now you simply sit and breathe, and let the night come. The sinew bundle sits on the cloth, tied with its thread, and you lift it in both hands, feeling its lightness, the way the dried strands click faintly against one another when you shift them. This bundle has been waiting for this moment through all the days you spent shaping the birch core and flattening the horn, and now the time has come to transform it from stiff, amber tendons into soft, feathery fibres that will back the bow and give it the tension it needs to spring. You loosen the thread and spread the strands on the cloth, their surfaces translucent in the morning light, each one a record of the horse that gave it, the muscles that once moved across the steppe, the life that has since passed. The wind outside the screen is a steady presence, not strong today, but constant, a low, even breath that presses against the felt and then releases, and the camp around you is quiet, most of the others out with the herds, the gurs standing silent under a pale sky. You select a flat, smooth stone that you use only for pounding sinew, a stone worn concave in its center from years of this same work, its surface cool and slightly gritty against your palm. You place the stone on the cloth in front of you, settling it firmly so it will not shift, and then you take up the wooden mallet, its head wrapped in a layer of old leather that has become dark and polished from use. The mallet fits your hand easily, the handle smooth, the weight balanced, and you hold it loosely for a moment, feeling its familiar heft, before you reach for the first strand of sinew and lay it across the stone. The strand is stiff and slightly curved, a pale amber color, and it resists when you try to bend it, hard as a strip of dried horn, but you know from long experience that this resistance is temporary, that the pounding will break apart the dried collagen fibers and turn them into something soft and workable. You begin to tap the sinew with the mallet, not with force, but with a gentle rhythmic percussion that falls into the steady beat of the wind, a soft thud that repeats and repeats without variation. The sinew flattens slightly under the first taps, the surface whitening where the mallet strikes, and you turn the strand with your free hand, tapping from the other side, working your way along its length. The sound is dull and muted, a low padded knock that does not carry far, that blends with the thumping screen and the distant murmur of the cook fire until you can no longer separate one sound from another. You tap and turn, and the strand begins to soften, its structure breaking down, the individual fibers starting to separate from one another, like the pages of a book slowly coming unbound. The morning is cool, and your breath forms small clouds that the wind snatches away as soon as they appear, but the work keeps your hands warm, the steady motion of the mallet generating a subtle heat that seeps into your knuckles. You pause after a while to examine the strand, lifting it from the stone and holding it up to the light, and you see that the fibers are beginning to loosen, the translucent amber giving way to a paler, more opaque white where the pounding has done its work. You return the strand to the stone and continue tapping, your arm moving from the elbow in a simple hinge, your shoulder relaxed, your mind drifting into the rhythm without effort. The pounding becomes a kind of meditation, a physical chant that asks for nothing but repetition, and you let it carry you along, the minutes passing unnoticed, the pile of unpounded sinew beside you, slowly diminishing as you move from strand to strand. The camp stirs faintly around you, a voice calling out from far across the grass, a horse snorting as it shifts its weight. But these sounds are distant and muffled, filtered through the wind and the screen, and they do not disturb the quiet focus of your work. A dog trots past the workspace, its tail low, its nose to the ground, and it does not stop or look at you, just continues on its way, a brief brown shape that appears and disappears. The sky is a pale washed blue, the kind of sky that holds no threat of rain, and the sun is a hazy disk behind a thin veil of cloud, casting a light that is soft and even without shadows. You tap and turn, and the sinew yields under your hands, the strands flattening, the fibers loosening, the whole bundle transforming gradually from a collection of stiff tendons into a mass of soft, tangled threads. When the first few strands are fully pounded, you set the mallet aside and pick up the sinew with your fingers, beginning the next step, which is combing. There is no comb in the traditional sense, only your own hands, and you pull the fibers apart one by one, using your thumbs and forefingers to tease them into individual, hair-like strands. This work is finer than the pounding, requiring more patience, more delicacy, and you sit forward on the stool, your eyes close to the fibers, your fingers moving with a precision that has become automatic over the years. The sinew fibers are pale gold in the light, almost silver where they catch the sun, and they drift apart from one another with a soft whispering sound, like the rustle of dry grass. You lay the separated fibers on a piece of damp felt beside you, spreading them out in a thin, even sheet, and the wind teases the edges of the pile, lifting a few stray fibers that float upward and vanish into the grey light. The combing process is slow and repetitive, and it fills the morning with a quiet, meditative texture. You take a fiber, pull it free, lay it on the felt, take another, pull it free, lay it down. The motions are small and precise, and your mind settles into them with the same calm that settled into the pounding, a state of quiet attention that is not quite thought and not quite emptiness, just a gentle awareness of the material, the light, the wind. The sinew under your fingers is soft now, softer than you would have imagined when you first looked at the stiff, dried strands, and it has a subtle resilience, a slight springiness that reminds you of its origin, of the tendons that once stretched and contracted in the legs of a living animal. You do not think about the horse directly, but the awareness is there, a quiet acknowledgement of the life that contributed to this bow, a life that was not wasted but transformed into something that will last. The sheet of combed sinew on the felt grows slowly, the fibers overlapping in a thin, translucent layer that catches the light and holds it, glowing faintly. You work through the pile of pounded strands until your fingers are dusted with fine, silvery particles, and then you pause to clean your hands, rubbing them together over the cloth, the particles falling like tiny flakes of snow. The wind has picked up slightly and it rattles the screen with a more insistent rhythm, the felt snapping against the wooden stakes. But your workspace remains sheltered enough, the cloth held down by its stones, the fibers on the damp felt staying in place. You take a sip of water from the leather bottle, the liquid cool and tasting of the stream, and you let your eyes rest on the steppe for a moment. The endless grass bending and straightening in waves, the distant hills a faint blue line on the horizon. The world is large and quiet, and you are a small part of it, a bowyer combing sinew in a windy camp, and the thought is peaceful, without loneliness. You return to the work, taking up the mallet again for the next batch of strands, and the rhythm resumes. Tap, turn, tap, turn, the mallet head falling with a soft, muffled thud that is the heartbeat of the day. The sinew responds to the pounding, the stiffness melting away, the fibers loosening, and you find yourself slipping into a deeper quiet, a place where the work and the wind and the light all become one thing, a single, continuous flow that carries you along. Your hands know what to do without any instruction from your mind. They have done this many times before, and the memory is stored in the muscles, in the joints, in the calluses on your palms. You let your hands lead and your mind follows, drifting, resting, and the morning passes in this way, unhurried and whole. By the time the sun has climbed to its highest point, the pounding is finished, all the strands reduced to soft, flattened masses that lie in a loose pile on the cloth. You set the mallet aside for the last time and stretch your arms, your shoulders pulling back, your spine lengthening, a small, satisfying ache in your muscles that tells you the work has been done. The pile of pounded sinew is pale and shimmering, and you begin the final combing, separating the fibers with your fingers, laying them on the damp felt in thin, even layers. This stage takes the rest of the afternoon, the hours stretching out in a slow, golden haze, the light shifting from pale to warm, the shadows under the screen lengthening toward the east. You work steadily, your fingers moving with the patience of water wearing down stone, and the sheet of sinew on the felt becomes thicker, more even, a translucent blanket of fibers that will soon be glued to the birch core. The smell of the sinew is faint and clean, like dried grass and old leather, and it mingles with the smoke from the fire pan and the distant scent of the horses, creating a smell that is the smell of this place, this camp, this season. The wind has eased again, settling into a gentle breeze that barely moves the screen, and the cook fire crackles softly, someone adding fresh dung chips that flare with a brief orange glow. You hear a child laugh somewhere to the west, a bright, bubbling sound that rises and falls, and then silence returns, the deep, companionable silence of the steppe at rest. When the combing is done, you cover the sheet of sinew fibers with another piece of damp felt, pressing it down gently, and you weight it with stones to keep it from drying out too quickly and to protect it from the wind. The sinew must stay slightly moist now, so that it will be flexible when you lay it onto the bough, and you check the dampness of the felt with your fingers, adding a few drops of water from the leather bottle where it feels too dry. The sinew is ready, waiting under its felt cover, and you feel a quiet satisfaction, not a loud emotion, but a deep, steady sense of having completed something, of having moved the bough one step closer to its final form. You clean the mallet with the rag, wiping the sinew dust from the leather head, and you set it back in its place on the cloth, beside the pounding stone. The workspace is tidy again, the tools aligned, the materials in their places, and you sit on the stool for a while, your hands resting on your thighs, your breathing slow and even. The light is turning amber now, the sun's sinking toward the horizon, and the sky is streaked with pale gold and soft lavender, the colors bleeding into one another like water on silk. The wind is a mere whisper, the screen barely moving, and the camp is settling into its evening rhythm, the cook fires glowing brighter, the voices softer, the horses standing still in the distance, their heads drooping as they rest. You think about the next stage, the warming of the glue, the careful laying of the sinew onto the birch core. But those are tasks for tomorrow. For now, the sinew is prepared, the fibers soft and ready, and you have done enough. You stand up from the stool, your knees stiff, and you walk out past the screen into the open air, the grass crunching under your boots, the sky vast above you. The wind touches your face, cool and gentle, and you stand there for a moment, looking out at the steppe, at the world that stretches on and on, the same world that has been here through all the seasons of your life, patient and unchanging. Then you turn and walk back toward your jar, the smoke rising from its smoke hole, the felt walls glowing warmly in the evening light, and you leave the workspace behind, the sinew resting under its felt cover, the bough waiting. You open the small clay pot, the one sealed with a wooden lid that fits snugly and smells faintly of brine. And you look inside at the amber crystals, the dried fish bladder glue that you made many weeks ago on the shore of a cold lake. The crystals are irregular in shape and size, some as large as your thumbnail, others as fine as grains of sand, and they catch the morning light with a soft, golden translucence, like chips of frozen honey. You pour them out onto a clean piece of leather, counting them not by number but by feel, the weight in your palm telling you that you have enough for the first course of sinew. The wind this morning is gentle and intermittent, the screen barely moving, and the camp is still heavy with the quiet of early day, the cook fires not yet lit, the horses still standing motionless in the distant grass. You take the crystals and place them on a flat grinding stone, a dark, smooth slab that has a shallow depression worn into its center, and you pick up a smaller handstone, round and heavy, that fits neatly into your grip. You begin to crush the crystals, pressing down with the handstone and grinding in slow circular motions, the sound a low, gritty crunch that is not loud but persistent, a deep grinding note that blends with the wind and the distant call of a waking bird. The crystals break apart under the pressure, the amber fragments becoming smaller and smaller, and you pause often to scrape the edges of the grinding stone with a bone spatula, pushing the crushed material back into the center, then resume the grinding, the circles widening and tightening, your wrist moving with a steady, practiced rotation that requires no conscious thought. The crushed glue becomes a coarse powder, pale amber in color, with a faint organic smell that is not quite fishy, but marine, reminiscent of deep water and old reeds. You grind it further, reducing it to a finer and finer texture, until it feels like coarse flour between your fingers, and then you tip the stone over a small clay bowl, scraping every last particle into the bowl with the bone spatula. The powder sits in the bottom of the bowl, a small mound of potential, and you add water from the leather bottle, pouring it slowly, a thin stream that soaks into the powder and turns it into a thick, cloudy paste. You stir the paste with a willow stick, the stick moving in slow spirals, and the paste begins to thin and clarify, the powder dissolving into the water until it becomes a milky, viscous liquid that clings to the stick in slow, heavy drops. This liquid must now be heated, because fish bladder glue only becomes truly adhesive when it is warm, and you carry the bowl carefully over to the firepan, where the embers from last night have been revived with fresh dung chips and are glowing a steady, pulsing orange. You place the bowl near the embers, not directly on them, but close enough to feel the heat, and you set a small iron trivet under it to keep it steady. Then you sit back on the stool and wait, because the glue must warm slowly, must come to the right temperature without boiling, and this waiting is a quiet, patient process that cannot be hurried. The glue begins to warm, and the liquid in the bowl shimmers slightly, small convection currents moving the surface in slow, barely visible spirals. The smell intensifies a little, becoming richer and more present, a smell like warm leather and wet stones, and you stir the glue occasionally with the willow stick, lifting it out to watch the liquid drip back into the bowl, checking the consistency. At first it drips like water, thin and fast, but as the minutes pass and the warmth penetrates deeper, the drips become slower, more viscous, the liquid stretching into thin, elastic threads that shimmer in the light before they break. You stir and watch, and the morning drifts around you, the sky brightening from grey to pale blue, the first cook-fire smoke beginning to rise from the gers in thin, bending columns. While the glue warms, you turn your attention to the workspace, making sure everything is ready for the laying of the sinew. The birch core rests on the cloth, covered with felt, and you uncover it, running your palm along the smooth belly, feeling the slight warmth of the wood, the satiny texture you worked so hard to create. The back of the bow, the side that will receive the sinew, is slightly rough, left that way on purpose so the glue will have something to grip, and you inspect it closely, making sure there is no dust or grease that could weaken the bond. You wipe it with a clean, dry rag, the rag moving in long, slow strokes from the handle to the tips, and then you set the core on a padded rack, a simple wooden frame with felt cushions that will hold the bow steady while you work. The horn strips lie on the cloth beside the core, their flat inner surfaces gleaming faintly, and you will not need them for this stage, so you cover them again and move them to the side, clearing space. The sinew fibers, pounded and combed and kept moist under the damp felt, are ready, and you lift the felt cover, checking the dampness with your fingers, adding a few more drops of water where the edges feel slightly dry. The fibers are pale and shimmering, lying in a thin, even sheet, and you separate them gently into smaller bundles, each one about the thickness of a finger, each one long enough to span the length of a bow limb. You lay these bundles in a row on the cloth, aligned and ready, and you cover them loosely with a dry cloth to keep the wind from teasing them apart. The glue is warmer now, and you stir it again, lifting the stick and watching the liquid drip. It falls in a slow, steady stream, the drops heavy and elastic, and when you touch a drop between your thumb and forefinger, it feels warm and slightly tacky, the stickiness increasing as it cools. The glue is ready, but it needs to stay warm throughout the work, so you adjust the position of the bowl, moving it a little closer to the embers, and you add a few more dung chips to the fire pan, the chips breaking apart and catching with a soft orange glow, the fire crackling gently, the smoke thin and sweet. You take a moment to clean your hands thoroughly, washing them in a small bowl of water, scrubbing under your nails with a stiff brush made of horsehair, because the glue will pick up any dirt or oil and carry it onto the bow, weakening the bond. Your hands are cold from the water, and you dry them on a clean rag. Then hold them near the fire pan for a moment, feeling the warmth seep into your knuckles, loosening the joints. The wind pushes a lock of hair across your forehead, and you tuck it back without thought, your eyes on the glue, your mind quiet and focused, the world reduced to this small circle of workspace, the fire, the materials, the task ahead. You pick up the bone spatula, a flat, smooth tool that fits your hand like an extension of your fingers, and you dip it into the warm glue, lifting it out with a load of the viscous liquid, the glue clinging to the bone in a thick, glossy layer. You carry the spatula to the birch core, and you begin to spread the glue along the back of the bow, starting at the handle and working outward toward one tip, the spatula moving in long, even strokes that leave a smooth, translucent film on the wood. The glue gleams under the pale light, and the smell of it rises around you, warm and marine, filling the workspace with its presence. You work slowly, making sure every inch of the surface is covered, the glue seeping into the slightly roughened grain of the birch, creating the foundation for the sinew that will follow. The glue begins to cool as soon as it touches the wood, and you work with a steady, unhurried pace, reloading the spatula often, spreading each layer evenly, building up a thin, consistent coating that will bond the sinew fibers to the wood. The wind is a soft hum outside the screen, and the fire pan crackles gently, and the sound of the spatula against the wood is a quiet, wet whisper. A sound that is almost not there, that blends with everything else until it becomes part of the texture of the morning. You work from the handle to one tip, then return to the handle and work toward the other tip, covering the entire back of the bow with the warm amber glue, And when you are done, you set the spatula down and inspect the surface, looking for any thin spots or air bubbles. Finding none, the glue layer smooth and even and glistening. Now comes the sinew. You lift one of the bundles of fibers, the pale, shimmering strands clinging together in a loose, feathery mass, and you dip it into the glue bowl, submerging it fully, letting the warm liquid soak into the fibers, saturating them until they turn translucent and heavy. You lift the bundle out, the glue dripping from it in slow, elastic threads, and you carry it to the bow, laying it along the glued back, starting at the handle and smoothing it outward toward the tip. Your thumb presses the fibers down gently, working from the center out, aligning every strand in parallel, pushing out any excess glue that wells up around the edges. The motion is slow and deliberate, your thumb moving in a continuous stroking rhythm, and the fibers settle into the glue, merging with it, becoming one with the wood. You take another bundle, dip it in the glue, lay it beside the first, overlapping slightly, and you smooth it down with the same careful, repetitive motion. The work continues in this way, bundle after bundle, dip and lay and smooth, dip and lay and smooth, and the sinew builds up on the back of the bow in a thin, even layer, a translucent blanket of fibers that will dry into a hard, tension-resistant backing. Your hands move with a rhythm that is slower than the pounding, slower than the rasping, a rhythm that is almost like breathing, steady and continuous and without any sharp edges. The glue is warm on your fingers, and the sinew is soft and compliant, and the bow takes shape under your hands, the core and the sinew beginning their long marriage. The morning passes into afternoon while you work, the light shifting from pale to golden, the shadows under the screen lengthening and then shortening again as the sun moves across the sky. You pause occasionally to rest your hands, to stir the glue and check its temperature, to wipe a smear of glue from the edge of the bow with the rag, and then you return to the work, the rhythm resuming without effort, your mind settled into a deep, quiet focus that is not intense, but relaxed, a state of gentle attention that holds the whole process in its embrace. The wind rises and falls, the screen flaps and settles, the horses move across the grass and stop again, and you continue, one bundle after another, building the sinew layer with the patience of the seasons. When the first full course of sinew is laid, covering the entire back of the bow from handle to tips, you set down the last bundle and step back, looking at the bow with a calm, assessing eye. The sinew is thick and even, the fibers aligned in straight, parallel lines that gleam with the wet glue, and the whole bow has a soft, luminous quality. The pale wood and the translucent sinew and the amber glue all blending into a single harmonious color. You wipe your hands on the rag, the glue sticky on your skin, and then you wash them in the bowl of water, rubbing them together, until the glue dissolves and the water turns cloudy, and you dry them on the inside of your deal, the fabric absorbing the moisture. The bow must now rest, the glue and sinew curing slowly in the dry, cool air, and you lift it carefully from the padded rack, carrying it over to a sheltered corner of the workspace where the wind cannot reach it directly. You lay it on a flat board, the sinew side facing up, and you cover it loosely with a piece of clean felt, the felt draped over it like a blanket, protecting it from dust and from the drying effects of the wind. The curing will take several days, and during that time you will add more layers of sinew, each one thinner than the last, each one building on the one before, but that is for tomorrow and the days after. For now, the first layer is down, and the bow has begun its transformation from a collection of separate materials into a single, unified thing. You clean the spatula and the glue bowl, scraping the remaining glue back into the pot and sealing the lid, and you bank the firepan with ash, the embers dimming to a soft red glow that will hold through the afternoon. The workspace is quiet, the tools put away, the cloth swept clean, and you sit on the stool for a while, your hands resting on your thighs, your breathing slow and even. The wind has picked up slightly, and it sings a low note against the screen, a note that is almost musical, and the sky outside is a deep, clear blue, the clouds having burned off in the afternoon sun. You feel a quiet satisfaction, the kind that comes from work done well, from a process followed with care, and you let the feeling settle into you without holding on to it, letting it pass through like the wind passes through the grass. The afternoon stretches on, and you rise from the stool, walking out past the screen into the open air, the grass crunching under your boots, the sky vast above you. The horses are grazing in the distance, their tails switching slowly, and the gers stand in a loose cluster, their smoke holes rising with thin, lazy columns of smoke. The steppe rolls away to the horizon in every direction, a sea of pale green and gold, and the wind moves across it in long, sweeping strokes, bending the grass, carrying the scent of earth and distance. You stand and breathe, and the bow rests under its felt cover, and the day eases toward evening with the slow, inevitable grace of all things. The glue pot has been warming since before the first light touched the smoke hole of your jar, the fish bladder glue, now a clear amber liquid that moves in slow, heavy spirals when you stir it with the willow stick. You sit on the stool in the grey early morning, the birch core resting on the padded rack before you, its back roughened and clean, waiting. The sinew fibres, pounded and combed and kept just barely damp under their felt cover, are divided into thin bundles that lie in a row on the cloth, each bundle no thicker than a blade of grass is wide, each one glinting faintly in the light of the small iron lamp that still burns beside you. The wind is a steady, low presence outside the screen, a constant pressure that makes the felt walls breathe in and out, and the camp is hushed, the others not yet stirring, the horses standing still in the distant grey grass. You lift the bone spatula from where it rests across the glue bowl and dip it into the warm liquid, watching the glue cling to the flat, smooth surface in a glossy layer that catches the lamplight. The spatula is warm in your hand, and you carry it carefully to the bow, tilting it slightly so the glue does not drip, then begin to spread the glue along the back of the birch core, starting at the exact center of the handle and working outward toward the upper tip. The motion is a single, continuous stroke, the spatula held at a low angle so that the glue flows evenly from the bone onto the wood, leaving a trail of translucent amber that gleams against the pale birch. You draw the spatula all the way to the tip, lifting it cleanly, then dip it again, returning to the handle and working toward the lower tip with the same slow, even pressure. The glue is thin enough to spread smoothly, but thick enough to stay where you put it, and it fills the tiny grooves you left in the wood grain, soaking in slightly, darkening the birch to a warm honey color. The smell of warm fish glue rises around you, clean and marine, a smell that has become familiar over many seasons, and you breathe it in without thought, your attention wholly on the surface you are creating, the foundation for the sinew that will follow. You work the glue over the entire back, from the handle swell to the narrow tips, reloading the spatula many times, each stroke overlapping the last by half its width, so that no bare wood remains. The glue begins to cool as soon as it leaves the bowl, and you do not rush, but you do not pause either, maintaining a steady rhythm that keeps the liquid workable, the spatula moving with a soft, wet whisper that is the only sound besides the wind and the distant, muted crackle of the firepan. When the back is completely coated, a uniform layer of glistening amber, you set the spatula down on the cloth and lean back slightly, inspecting the surface in the lamplight. The glue is smooth, without bubbles or thin patches, and it has the look of a still pond at dusk, reflecting the faint, wavering flame. You nod once to yourself, a small, private acknowledgement, then reach for the first bundle of sinew. The bundle is light in your hand, the fibers clinging together in a soft, feathery strip that drapes over your fingers like a lock of unspun wool. You dip the entire bundle into the glue bowl, submerging it completely, watching the warm liquid wick upward through the fibers, turning them from pale gold to translucent amber. You lift it out slowly, letting the excess glue drip back into the bowl, the drops falling in long elastic strings that stretch and break, and you carry the bundle to the bow, positioning it at the center of the handle, the starting point of the layer. With your thumb, you press the bundle down onto the glued wood, beginning at the very center and smoothing outward along the limb, your thumb moving with a slow, deliberate pressure that presses the fibers flat, aligns them with the grain, and pushes any trapped air or excess glue ahead of your motion. The sinew settles into the glue like a strand of silk settling onto still water, merging with the amber layer, becoming part of it, and you feel the slight give of the wood beneath the fiber, the springy resilience that will one day propel an arrow, but for now just yields gently under your touch. You take the next bundle, dip it into the glue, and lay it beside the first, overlapping the edge by a fiber's width so that there is no seam, no gap, just a continuous sheet of sinew that extends from the center toward the tip. Your thumb smooths this bundle too, working from the overlap outward, and the motion becomes a soft, stroking rhythm. Dip and lay and smooth, dip and lay and smooth, your hands moving with a patience that feels like time itself, as slow to match your pace. The sinew bundles are each slightly different in length and thickness, and you choose them by feel, picking the ones that match the taper of the limb, using longer bundles near the handle and shorter ones as you approach the narrow tip. You work only a handspan of the limb at a time, brushing fresh glue onto the next section as you go, because the glue must be warm and wet when the sinew touches it, and you keep the bowl near the fire pan, stirring it occasionally, testing its temperature with a drop on your wrist, adding a few chips of dung to the embers when the heat begins to fade. The morning light strengthens beyond the screen, the grey giving way to a soft pale blue, and the lamp flame seems to pale in response, though you do not extinguish it. The wind shifts slightly, now coming more from the north, and it brings a cooler thread of air that makes the hair on your forearms prickle, but your hands remain steady, the work requiring a gentle, consistent warmth of motion that keeps your fingers supple. You pause after completing the upper limb to flex your hands, opening and closing them slowly, wiping a smear of glue from your thumb onto the rag at your belt, and you look out for a moment at the camp, seeing a thin column of smoke rising from a jar to the east, hearing the distant clank of a metal pot, the sound carried on the wind, and then gone. The world is waking, and you are a part of it, a bowyer laying sinew, and the peace of the morning settles into your chest like a slow breath. You turn your attention to the lower limb, dipping the spatula into the glue and spreading it along the back from the handle down to the tip. The motion identical to before, the same steady stroke, the same amber trail, the same careful overlapping. The wood here has a slight wave in the grain near the tip, a natural feature you noted weeks ago, and you work the glue into the wave with an extra stroke of the spatula, making sure the sinew will bond evenly across the subtle undulation. Then you lift another bundle of fibers, dip it, and begin to lay it down, your thumb smoothing from the center outward, the sinew settling into the glue with the same quiet compliance. The process is like weaving but without a loom, a single thread tapestry that covers the back of the bow with a layer of aligned, tension-holding strands. The fibers overlap each other at their edges, creating a seamless sheet, and you take care to keep every strand parallel to the long axis of the bow, because the strength of the sinew backing depends on this alignment, on the way the fibers will pull together as one when the bow is bent. You know this not as a fact you recite, but as a feeling in your hands, a sense of rightness when the fibers lie straight and true. The sun climbs higher, and the light through the gap in the screen becomes a warm golden shaft that falls across the cloth, illuminating the dust motes that float in the still air. The smell of the glue has mellowed, blending with the earth scent of the dun fire and the faint sweet aroma of the dried grass that pads the workspace floor. You continue the work, bundle after bundle, and your mind enters a state that is not quite thinking and not quite emptiness, a quiet flow where the materials and your hands and the wind all move together in a single harmonious rhythm. There is no hurry, no goal beyond the next bundle, the next stroke of your thumb, and you let the minutes pass uncounted, the morning sliding toward midday without any marker except the shifting of the light and the gradual covering of the bow's back with the translucent, golden layer of sinew and glue. When you reach the lower tip, you use a smaller bundle, trimming it with a quick, precise cut of the small knife to fit the narrowed width, and you lay it down with extra care, smoothing the very end until the fibers are flush with the wood, no loose ends, no gaps. You sit back on the stool and look at the bow, the entire back now covered with the first course of sinew, a single, continuous layer that glistens in the lamplight and the daylight together. The fibers are lined, like the grain of a perfect stone. The birch core is completely hidden now, encased in a clear amber matrix that will dry hard and translucent, and the bow has a new weight in your hand when you lift it, a slight heft that was not there before, the weight of the sinew and glue adding substance to the slender wood. You carry the bow carefully to the sheltered corner of the workspace, the one where the wind cannot reach directly, and you lay it on the flat board you have prepared, the sinew side facing up, the belly still bare wood. You cover it loosely with a piece of clean felt, the felt draping over it like a blanket, and you tuck the edges under the board to keep the cover from blowing away. The sinew must now dry and cure, the glue slowly hardening, the fibers bonding to the wood and to each other in a process that will take several days, and during that time you will add more layers, each one thinner than the last, building up the backing until it can hold the tremendous tension of a drawn bow. But that is for later, for tomorrow and the next day, and for now, the first layer is complete, a milestone reached in the long, patient journey of the bow. You clean your tools while the sun climbs to its highest point, wiping the spatula with the rag until the bone gleams white again, scraping the last of the warm glue back into the pot and sealing the lid tightly. You wash your hands in the bowl of water, scrubbing the glue from your fingers, the water turning cloudy and then clear as you rinse them, and you dry them on the inside of your deal, the wool absorbing the moisture with a soft, familiar scratch. The workspace is tidy again, the cloth swept, the tools aligned, the sinew bundles covered, and you feel a quiet satisfaction, the kind that comes from work that is both done and not done, from the middle of a process that stretches out ahead and behind, a process that has no sharp ending, only a gradual unfolding. The wind has not lessened, and the screen continues its soft, rhythmic thumping, and the camp has fully woken. Voices calling, dogs barking, horses being led out to graze, but all of it is distant, a backdrop to the calm center that is this workspace, this bow, this moment. You stand up from the stool and stretch your arms overhead, your spine lengthening, your shoulders pulling back, and you walk out past the screen into the open air. The steppe is wide and golden under the midday sun, the grass rippling in waves that stretch to the horizon, and the sky is a pale, cloudless blue, the kind of blue that seems to go on forever. The wind touches your face, cool and steady, and you stand there for a while, letting it wash over you, feeling the slight ache in your hands, the good fatigue of the morning's work. Then you turn and walk back toward your chair, the felt walls glowing warmly in the light, and you go inside to rest, to eat a little dried curd and drink some tea, leaving the bow to its slow, patient curing under the felt cover. The first course of sinew is laid, and the bow is one step closer to its final form, and you are content, a small figure in a vast landscape, a bowyer at peace with his work. The first morning after laying the sinew, you wake to a wind that has shifted to the north, a cooler, drier current that streams across the steppe and presses against the felt walls of the jer with a low, insistent hum. You lie still for a while, listening, feeling the cold air on your face while the rest of your body stays warm under the blankets. Then you rise, dress in your layered wool and leather, and step outside into a sky that is pale and clear, the kind of sky that holds no moisture at all. The dry air is good for curing, you think, as you walk across the sandy grass toward the workspace, your boots crunching on the frost-stiffened ground, your breath forming small clouds that the wind snatches away. The screen is flapping steadily, the sound a soft, rhythmic thumping that has become as familiar as your own heartbeat. And when you reach the sheltered corner where the bow rests, you kneel down and lift the felt cover gently, folding it back to reveal the sinew layer beneath. The sinew has changed overnight. What was a wet, translucent amber yesterday evening is now a pale, opaque gold. The surface dry to the touch but still slightly tacky when you press your thumb against it with the lightest possible pressure. The glue has begun to set, the collagen fibers cross-linking in the slow chemistry of curing, and the sinew has shrunk slightly, pulling tight against the birch core, which is exactly what it should do. You run your fingers along the length of the backing, feeling the texture which is smooth but not slick, with a subtle grain like very fine leather. There are no cracks, no bubbles, no spots where the sinew has lifted from the wood, and you nod to yourself, a small quiet acknowledgement, before covering the bow again, and tucking the felt edges under the board to keep out the dust and the probing wind. The waiting has begun. Curing sinew is not a process that can be hurried, and the days ahead will be filled with small, quiet tasks while the bow rests and the glue hardens and the fibers bind themselves to the wood in a union that will last for generations. You turn from the sheltered corner and walk over to your stool, sitting down and looking at the cloth where your tools are spread, the rasps and scrapers and knives all clean and oiled, waiting for the next stage. But the next stage is not today. So you pick up a leather strap that has been sitting at the edge of the cloth for weeks, a bridle rein that broke during a ride to the river valley, and you examine the torn end, turning it over in your hands, feeling the toughness of the leather, the way the fibers have frayed into a rough, dark brush. Mending this will fill the morning, a simple, useful task that requires just enough attention to keep your hands busy while your mind drifts. You take a length of waxed thread from a small pouch on the cloth and a curved awl with a bone handle, and you begin to stitch the torn ends of the leather together, the awl piercing the tough material with a soft, popping sound, the thread pulling through with a faint, waxy whisper. The wind continues its steady work outside the screen, and the camp stirs around you, the sounds of morning chores filtering through the felt, a woman singing a tuneless song as she milks a mare, the clank of a bronze pot being set on a fire, the distant bark of a dog chasing something unseen. You stitch slowly, evenly, each loop of the thread pulled snug but not too tight, and the broken rein begins to mend under your hands, the two torn edges drawing together into a strong, neat seam. The work is monotonous in the best way, a simple, repetitive motion that soothes the mind, and you let yourself sink into it, the needle and thread and leather becoming the whole world for a while. The morning passes, and the sun climbs higher, the light through the gap in the screen shifting from pale gold to a warmer amber. You finish the bridle rein and set it aside, flexing the mended section to test its strength, and it holds firm. You stretch your hands, flexing your fingers, and you stand up from the stool, walking out past the screen to look at the sky. The wind is still from the north, dry and cool, and it carries the faint, clean smell of distant snow, though no snow will fall for many weeks yet. The horses are grazing in a loose group to the east, their manes blowing sideways, their tails switching lazily, and beyond them the grass stretches on and on, a pale, rippling sea that meets the sky in a soft, blurred line. You stand and breathe the cold air, feeling it fill your lungs and leave again, and then you walk back to the workspace and kneel by the bow once more, lifting the felt cover to check the sinew. It is drier now, the surface no longer tacky at all, and the color has lightened further to a soft, creamy white with a faint golden undertone. The sinew has shrunk a little more, pulling the tips of the bow slightly upward in the beginnings of a reflex curve, and you feel the stiffness of the backing with your thumb, pressing gently, testing the hardness. It is not fully cured yet, not nearly, but it is progressing well, and you cover it again and tuck the felt edges carefully, smoothing the fabric flat. The waiting continues, and you decide to spend the afternoon fetching water from the stream that cuts through the grass, about a mile to the south, a walk you have taken many times, a walk that will fill the hours with a slow, steady rhythm. You go to your chair and collect 2 wooden buckets, their staves dark with age and water stains, their rope handles smooth from use, and you begin to walk south, away from the camp, into the open steppe. The wind is at your back now, pushing you gently, and the grass brushes against your boots with a soft, dry rustle. The ground rises and falls in gentle swells, the sandy soil dotted with small, hardy shrubs and patches of pale lichen, and the sky arches overhead, vast and blue and empty. You walk at a steady pace, not fast, not slow, and the rhythm of your footsteps blends with the wind and the rustling grass until the walk becomes a kind of meditation, a quiet, physical chant that settles your mind and loosens your shoulders. The stream appears after a while, a thin, silver line in a shallow valley, its banks lined with low willows and clumps of reeds that whisper in the breeze. You kneel on a flat stone at the edge of the water and dip the first bucket, the cold liquid rushing in with a low, gurgling sound, the bucket growing heavy in your hand as it fills. You set it on the bank and fill the second bucket, then sit for a moment on the stone, watching the water flow over its bed of smooth pebbles, the surface dappled with light that moves and shifts like a living thing. The stream is cold and clear, and tastes faintly of minerals when you cup your hands and drink, and you stay there for a while, doing nothing, just being, the wind rustling the reeds, the water murmuring its endless song. You carry the buckets back to the camp, walking more slowly now with the weight, switching hands when one arm tires, the water sloshing gently against the wooden sides. The walk back feels shorter, the camp appearing sooner than you expect, the gears rising out of the grass with their smoke holes trailing thin columns of white. You set the buckets near the cookfire and pour some of the water into the small bowl in your workspace. Then sit down on the stool again, your legs pleasantly tired, your hands cool and damp. The afternoon is waning now, the light beginning to deepen, and you check the bow one more time, lifting the felt cover and touching the sinew with the back of your fingers. It is cool and dry and hard, the surface smooth as polished bone, and you know that by tomorrow it will be ready for the second layer, a thinner course that will build on this foundation. You cover the bow and bank the fire pan with ash, the embers dimming to a soft red glow, and you walk back to your jar as the first stars appear in the darkening sky. The second morning comes with a wind that is swung back to the west, warmer and slightly damp, carrying the smell of distant rain that may or may not arrive. You wake and dress and walk to the workspace, and you kneel by the bow, lifting the felt cover to inspect the curing sinew. The first layer is fully dry now, hard and tight, the fibers fused into a single continuous sheet that has pulled the bow tips into a gentle reflex curve. You run your palm along the backing, feeling the smooth, unyielding surface, and you know it is time for the next layer. You stir the glue pot and set it near the fire pan to warm, and you uncover the sinew bundles, the damp felt having kept them soft and pliable through the night. The second layer will be thinner than the first, a single course of finer fibers laid over the cured backing, and you work with the same slow, deliberate rhythm. Spread the glue, dip the sinew, lay it down, smooth it with your thumb. The process is familiar now, your hands finding the motion without thought, and the morning passes in a quiet, focused trance, the wind humming against the screen, the camp sounds distant and muffled. When the second layer is laid, you cover the bow again and let it rest, and you spend the afternoon sharpening your knives on the whetstone, the metal singing a high, thin note that cuts through the wind, the blades growing keener with each slow, circular stroke. Days pass in this way, a quiet routine of checking and curing, adding a third layer of sinew that is thinner still, almost translucent, then waiting again while the dry wind does its work. Each morning you kneel by the bow and lift the felt cover, and each morning the sinew is harder, tighter, the reflex curve deepening slightly, the backing transforming from a soft, organic material into something that feels like horn, like stone, like the shell of a beetle. You fill the waiting hours with small camp chores, mending a torn felt panel on the windward side of the jar, stitching it closed with a bone needle and coarse thread, tending the horses, checking their hooves for stones, brushing the dust from their coats with a stiff brush, collecting dried dung from the edges of the camp, piling it into baskets for the cook fires, sitting by the fire in the evenings watching the stars come out, listening to the wind as it moves through the grass. The bow rests under its felt cover, and the sinew cures, and the days blend into one another with the slow, seamless flow of water moving through a deep, still lake. One morning you wake to a wind that is almost calm. A rare thing on the steppe, the air so still that you can hear the sound of a horse chewing grass from 50 paces away. You walk to the workspace and lift the felt cover, and you see that the third layer of sinew has cured completely, the backing now a hard, smooth, opaque white with a faint golden shimmer, the surface flawless and unblemished. The reflex curve is set, the tips pulled gently back toward the belly, and when you tap the backing with your knuckle, it gives a dull, solid thwack, like tapping a block of seasoned wood. The sinew and the birch have become one thing, a single, unified material that is stronger than either of them alone, and you feel a quiet satisfaction settle into your chest. Not a loud emotion, but a deep, steady sense of rightness. You cover the bow again, though it does not need much longer to cure now, and you sit on the stool, looking out at the camp, at the gears standing in their quiet cluster, at the horses grazing in the distance, at the grass that bends and straightens in the faint breeze. The wind is curing the layers, and the wind is curing you too, in a way, your mind settling into the slow, patient rhythm of the steppe, your hands resting, your heart beating with the same steady, unhurried pulse as the world around you. The sinew is cured to a hard, pale shell. The horn belly has been glued and shaped and scraped until it matches the curve of the birch core, and now the bow lies across your knees in the quiet of the evening, the fire crackling softly beside you, the wind a gentle breath that barely moves the screen. The day has been long and warm, the sun lingering on the horizon in a slow golden fade, and the camp has settled into its night rhythm, the horses standing still in the distant grass, the gers glowing faintly from the cook fires within. You sit on the low stool, the bow resting on a wooden block set before you, and you begin the tillering, the slow, patient process of teaching the bow to bend. The tillering block is a simple thing, a thick plank with a notch cut into the top, and you place the upper tip of the bow into the notch, the sinew backing facing away from you, the horn belly facing up. You hold the handle in both hands, your fingers wrapping around the shaped swell, and you apply the first gentle pressure, pulling down with a slow, steady force that is no more than the weight of a small stone. The bow resists, as it should, the sinew and horn and wood all working together to push back against your hands with a springy, alive sensation, and you watch the curve as it begins to form, a shallow, even arc that starts near the handle and flows outward toward the tips. The firelight flickers across the horn belly, casting shifting shadows that make the curve seem to move, and you hold the pressure for a moment, your eyes traveling the full length of the limb, searching for any spot where the bend is too sharp, too flat, too uneven. You release the pressure slowly, letting the bow return to its resting shape, and you pick up the fine scraper, a small thin blade set into a wooden handle, its edge sharp enough to remove the finest shaving of horn. You have been tillering for several evenings now, working a little at a time, scraping and bending, and the bow has slowly come into balance, the limbs flexing in harmony with each other, the curve deepening by almost imperceptible degrees. Tonight you are close, very close, and you can feel it in the way the bow responds to your hands, the resistance even and smooth, the bend flowing from the handle to the tips without any flat spots or hinges. But there is still a small stiffness near the upper limb, a place where the horn is just slightly too thick, and you lay the bow across your knees and begin to scrape. The scraper makes a soft, hissing sound, a whisper of horn dust curling up from the edge like a fine grey feather, and you work with short, delicate strokes, removing only a breath of material at a time. The fire pops and crackles, a shower of sparks rising briefly into the dark air before vanishing, and the wind stirs the grass beyond the screen, a low, rustling sigh that blends with the scrape of the tool and the distant rhythmic chirp of a cricket. You scrape and test, placing the bow back on the block, applying pressure, watching the curve, then releasing and scraping again, and the process is a slow, careful dialogue between your hands and the wood, a conversation without words that has been going on for many hours across many days. You think of nothing but the shape of the curve, the feel of the scraper, the way the horn yields under the blade, and your mind is quiet, wholly absorbed in the task, the rest of the world falling away into the darkness beyond the firelight. The stiffness near the upper limb begins to ease, the curve deepening just enough to match the lower limb, and you sight along the bow from tip to tip, closing one eye, checking the symmetry. The reflex curve imparted by the sinew backing gives the bow a subtle, recurved shape when unstrung, the tips bending gently away from the belly, and as you apply pressure on the tillering block, the limbs flex through their arc, the reflex pulling out and then returning as you release. You scrape a little more from the horn belly, this time near the handle, where a slight flatness has developed, and you work the scraper in tiny, overlapping strokes, the horn dust falling onto your lap in a fine, pale powder. The smell of the horn is faint and slightly sweet, like singed hair and old beeswax, and it mingles with the smoke of the dung fire and the cool, clean scent of the night wind. The fire burns lower, and you add a few dried chips of dung, the chips breaking apart in your hand and falling onto the coals, where they catch with a soft orange glow and a curl of thin, white smoke. The light flares briefly, illuminating the workspace, the cloth with its tools, the screen with its patches and stitches, the bow across your knees with its pale sinew back and its dark, polished horn belly. You lift the bow and place it on the block again, and you apply pressure once more, this time drawing the bow a little further, feeling the resistance increase smoothly, the curve deepening into a graceful, even arc that is beautiful in its symmetry. The upper limb and the lower limb bend together, matched, balanced, and you hold the pressure for a long moment, your eyes tracing the curve from the handle to the tips, seeing no flat spots, no hinges, just the smooth flowing bend of a bow that is nearly finished. You release the pressure and set the bow aside, resting it on the padded rack, and you sit back on the stool, your hands resting on your thighs, your breathing slow and even. The stars have come out, thick and clear, the great band of the sky river stretching from horizon to horizon in a wash of pale silver light, and the wind has dropped to a bare whisper, the screen hanging still, the camp silent except for the occasional distant snort of a horse. You feel a quiet satisfaction, not a loud or triumphant feeling, but a deep, steady sense of having done something well, of having brought the bow through its long journey from raw materials to this moment of balance and symmetry. The tillering is almost complete, just a few more small adjustments to make, a few more tiny shavings of horn to remove, but the hardest part is over, and the bow is what it was meant to be. You sit by the fire for a long while, letting the warmth seep into your hands, and you think about the string you will make tomorrow, the twisting of horsehair and silk, the tying of the loops, the first time the bow will be braced and drawn. That will be the final chapter, the culmination of all these weeks of patient work, and you feel a quiet anticipation, not a hurry but a readiness, a sense that the bow is waiting to become what it has always been meant to be. The fire burns down to a bed of glowing coals, and the stars wheel slowly overhead, and the night deepens around you, vast and quiet and full of a peace that settles into your bones, like the warmth of the fire, like the weight of the bow, like the memory of every step that brought you here. You rise from the stool, your body stiff from sitting, and you walk to the sheltered corner where the bow rests on its rack, the sinew gleaming faintly in the starlight, the horn dark and smooth, the whole thing a testament to patience and craft and the quiet work of hands. You cover it gently with a felt cloth, tucking the edges, and you turn and walk back to your chair, the grass crunching under your boots, the night air cool on your face, the world still and peaceful around you. The tillering is done, and the bow is ready for the string, and you are ready too, a bowyer at the end of a long, slow, beautiful road. The string begins as a handful of horsehair, long and dark, taken from the tail of a mare that grazes in the hollow to the east. Her coat the color of dried grass, her temperament calm and steady. You have washed the hair in cold stream water and dried it on a felt cloth in the sun, and now it lies across your palm, smooth and slightly coarse, smelling faintly of the animal and of the clean wind that blows through the camp. Beside the horsehair, you have laid out a small bundle of silk thread, traded many seasons ago from a merchant who came through the camp with a caravan of camels, and the silk is a pale cream color, fine and strong, its fibers glinting in the afternoon light. You sit on the stool in the open air, the screen pushed aside today because the wind is gentle and the sky is wide and blue, and you begin to make the string. You take a small bunch of horsehair, about as thick as your little finger, and you comb it through your fingers, aligning the strands, pulling out any that are too short or too coarse, setting them aside for other uses. The hair is slippery and wants to slide apart, but you dampen your fingers slightly from the bowl of water beside you, and smooth the bundle until it lies even and straight. Then you add a few strands of silk, laying them alongside the horsehair, the silk blending with the dark hair to create a composite cord that will be both strong and supple, resisting the stretch that pure horsehair alone would have. You hold the bundle at one end and begin to twist it with your thumb and forefinger, a slow, steady rotation that tightens the fibers together, the horsehair and silk marrying into a single, unified strand. The twisting is a calm, rhythmic motion, and you soon move the work to your thigh, rolling the bundle against the fabric of your trousers with the flat of your palm, the friction generating a faint warmth, the fibers tightening and smoothing under the pressure. You work from your knee to your hip, a long, even stroke that rolls the strand into a chord, and then you lift your hand and return to the starting point, rolling again, the repetition so steady it becomes a kind of breathing. The strand lengthens under your hands, the horsehair and silk twisting together into a fine, tight cord that is the color of dark honey with pale flecks of cream, and you add more hair and more silk as you go, splicing the new fibers into the old with a simple overlap that the twisting locks into place. The sound is a soft, continuous friction, a whisper of hair and silk that blends with the wind and the distant rhythmic call of a lark. The camp is quiet around you. The afternoon, a slow golden lull between the morning chores and the evening meal, and you work without hurry, your hands finding the rhythm and keeping it, the string growing longer and longer, coiling in a loose pile on the cloth at your feet. You pause occasionally to test the tension, pulling the strand between your hands, feeling the slight give and then the firm resistance, and you adjust the twist when it feels too loose or too tight, your fingers sensitive to the smallest change in the cord's behavior. The string must be strong enough to hold the full draw weight of the bow, but it must also be supple enough to bend sharply around the nocks at the tips, and you find the balance through a series of small intuitive adjustments, your hands guided by a knowledge that is stored in the muscles rather than the mind. When the string has reached the proper length, about a handspan longer than the bow itself, you stop twisting and hold it up to the light, sighting along its length to check for evenness. The cord is straight and smooth, the twist consistent from end to end, and you nod to yourself and begin the next step, which is to form the loops. You take one end of the string and double it back on itself, forming a small eye, and you wrap the overlap tightly with a thin strand of silk, the thread biting into the horsehair, holding the loop in place. The wrapping is a careful, precise process, the silk thread wound round and round in tight, even coils, each turn pressed snugly against the one before, and you work slowly, your fingers moving with the patience of long practice. When the wrapping is complete, you tie off the silk with a small tight knot and trim the loose ends, the loop now secure, the throat just large enough to slip over the nock at the bow tip. You repeat the process at the other end, forming the second loop, and then you hold the finished string in both hands, feeling its weight, its balance, the way it drapes in a gentle curve. The string is a beautiful thing in its own right. Simple and functional, the horsehair and silk combining into a cord that is light and strong and almost alive in its suppleness. And you set it aside on the cloth for a moment, taking a sip of water from the leather bottle, your hands resting. The afternoon light has deepened into a rich gold, the sun beginning its slow descent toward the western hills, and the screen casts a long, soft shadow across the workspace. A horse whinnies somewhere to the north, and the sound carries on the wind, thin and distant, fading into the hush of the steppe. Now you take up the bow from its padded rack, the sinew backing hard and pale, the horn belly dark and smooth, the tillering complete, the balance found. You hold it in your left hand, your fingers wrapping around the shaped handle, and you take the string in your right hand, fitting one loop over the upper nock, the horn tip carved with a shallow groove that holds the loop securely. Then you place the lower tip of the bow against the instep of your left boot, the sinew side facing you, and you bend the bow gently backward, the reflex curve resisting and then yielding, the limbs flexing with a smooth, even tension that you can feel all the way through your arms. You slide the second loop up toward the lower nock, and the bow bends further, the curve deepening, the sinew stretching microscopically, the horn compressing, the birch core flexing in its quiet, strong way. The loop slips into the lower groove, and you release the pressure slowly, letting the bow straighten until the string is taut, the limbs held in their braced curve. The bow is strung for the first time, and it becomes something new, something complete. It rests in your hand with a balance that feels natural and bright, the string a straight dark line connecting the two tips, the limbs curving in a smooth, even arc that is the result of all those days of scraping and tillering, of gluing and weighting, of pounding and combing and shaping. You hold the bow out at arm's length, sighting along the string, checking the alignment, and the string bisects the handle perfectly, the tips aligned with the center, the whole thing true and straight. There is a quiet satisfaction in this moment, not a loud or triumphant feeling, but a deep, steady sense of arrival, of having brought something into the world that was not there before. You pluck the string once, pulling it back a finger's width and releasing, and the sound is a low, dull twang that vibrates briefly in the air, and then is swallowed by the wind, absorbed into the larger silence of the steppe. The sound is not musical, not harsh, just a short, resonant thrum that is there and then gone, a small announcement of the bow's completeness. You do not draw the bow fully, do not test its power or loose an arrow into the grass. That is not the purpose of this moment. The purpose is simply to feel the bow as it is, a finished thing, a working thing, a union of wood and horn and sinew and skill, and you hold it for a long while, your hand wrapped around the grip, your eyes tracing the curve of the limbs, the texture of the sinew, the dark gleam of the horn. The evening is coming on now, the sun a low orange disk just above the distant hills, and the sky is streaked with bands of gold and rose and pale lavender, the colors soft and diffuse, bleeding into one another like water on silk. The wind has eased to a gentle current that barely stirs the grass, and the camp is quiet, the cook fires glowing softly in front of the gers, the horses standing still in the distance, their heads drooping. You take a soft cloth from the workspace, a clean oiled rag, and you wipe the limbs of the bow, the horn belly first, then the sinew back, the cloth moving in long, slow strokes that remove the last traces of dust and leave the surfaces with a faint, protective sheen. The bow gleams in the evening light, the materials now unified, the tool complete, and you feel the weight of it in your hand, the balance, the readiness. You do not string the bow again. Instead, you lay it across your knees and look at it for a long time, letting the sight of it settle into your memory, the shape and the color and the feel of it under your fingers. The wind brushes against your face, cool and soft, carrying the smell of dry earth and distant water, and the first stars begin to appear in the darkening sky, faint pinpricks of light that grow brighter as the dusk deepens. The camp is still, the voice is low, the fires crackling quietly, and the world feels vast and peaceful, a place where a bowyer can sit with his finished work and feel nothing but a calm, quiet contentment. After a while, you rise from the stool and walk to your ger, carrying the bow in one hand, the string coiled loosely around the handle. Inside the ger, the air is warm and still, the felt walls glowing faintly from the embers in the fire pan, and you go to the back of the tent, where a space is kept for things that are finished and valuable. You take a length of cleaned felt, soft and thick, and you wrap the bow carefully, folding the felt over the limbs, tucking the ends, creating a protective cocoon that will keep the dust and the damp away. The wrapped bow lies in your hands like a sleeping thing, quiet and still, and you place it gently in the back of the ger, beside the other bows you have made, the ones from other seasons, other years, each one a record of time and skill and patience. You step outside again, the felt door flap falling closed behind you, and you walk a little way from the camp out into the open grass. The evening has deepened into twilight, the sky a deep, dusky blue, the last of the sunset fading to a pale rim of gold on the horizon, and the steppe stretches out before you, vast and silent, the grass dark and still, the hills a faint, shadowy line in the distance. The wind has almost stopped, just a breath of air that barely moves the hair on your forehead, and the world is so quiet you can hear the sound of your own breathing, the slow, steady rhythm of it, in and out, in and out. You stand there for a long time, watching the twilight deepen, the stars come out in their thousands, the great band of the sky river arching overhead in a wash of silver light, and you feel a peace that is as wide and deep as the steppe itself. A peace that has been built slowly, day by day, task by task, through all the hours of patient work. The bow is finished and the task is complete, and you turn back toward the camp, the ger's dark shapes against the faint glow of the fires within, the smoke holes trailing thin columns of white that rise straight up into the still air. You walk slowly, your boots crunching softly on the grass, and you think of nothing in particular, your mind as quiet as the world around you, your body tired in a good way, your hands remembering the feel of the wood and the horn and the sinew. The wind has ceased, the camp is silent, and the night wraps around you like a blanket, warm and dark and full of rest. You reach the door of your chair and pause, looking back once at the pale rim of the steppe where it meets the sky, and then you go inside, the felt flap closing behind you, the bough resting in its felt cocoon, the world still and peaceful, the day done,